Now, let me just say this in passing. Your heart can be right, and God's not a mean God. He's not going to not beat you up, okay? But he is going to teach you, like a father and a mother teach their sons and daughters, of how to grow as people. Sometimes that's not very exciting for Josiah. He wanted Lucky Charms yesterday. And Julie said, that's a treat. That's not cereal, that's a treat. You can't have that right now. Now, if he had his way, he would probably be a lot like me. Have sugar cereal, not only in the morning, but the late night snack and midday. You understand? And that's really not good and healthy for him. But he doesn't know that yet, does he? So what did he do? He started just crying and screaming and, oh, you talking about Lucky Charms? You hate me. I'm going to bed and never getting out. I walk in, what in the tarnation's going on? So we do, he responds differently to Julie and I. But you get the point. God's not a mean God, but there are things we have to learn if we want to grow in God. And I think that's very, very, if you want to stop growing in God, if you don't want to walk with God, then, you won't, and you don't, right? But if you want to walk with God, there's standards that God keeps, in some ways, resetting. I find a bit unfair at times. But because he's more concerned about our character and our growth and us becoming more like him than he is in our personal, perhaps, desires and being happy. Our American culture desires. He's not American, okay? Okay. So that's David. Now, what happened, he was at his height here, okay? David was at his height. Then the kingdom went downhill from there. I don't know if many of you know this part of the story. Everybody thinks, he ended on a high. He ended on a low. He ended on a low. And it started when he had an affair with Bathsheba. I'll talk a little bit more about that next week. I wanted to read that because I think there's a lot of amazing things to understand about David even in that. He was a great repenter. You want to know how to repent? Look at David. And that's some of the things, I'll hit on next week. But basically, his kingdom started to go downhill. He not only had an affair with a person. You got to understand, this is the king. And, at least in America, our president doesn't even have as much power as David had. It's just set up different, okay? So David just saw this woman naked. He said, wow, I want her. Called his advisors together. I want that one there. Yes, king. They brought her in. They had an affair. She got pregnant. David's in trouble. Okay, I'm just kind of bringing it down to the nuts and bolts. So what does David do? He goes out, finds her husband, puts her husband on the front lines to be killed. That was the last thing. He did a few things before that. First he said, well, have your husband come back from war and have sex with you right away. That way he won't know it was me. He'll think it's him. David's a man after God's heart, right? Keep these things in mind, okay? Because I think we over-glorify certain things. David brought this guy to sleep with him, but this guy was so honorable. He said, how can I sleep with my wife? When our nation's at war, I will sleep outside the gates in my tent. I won't even be with my woman right now. So David continued to do bad things. And then finally he said, this guy's so honorable, put him on the front lines. The ones, who crash the gates, who are always killed in the movies. Who get the arrows first, you know what I mean? Man, I would not have been in the army then. I would have been a farmer. Yeah, holy smokes, can you imagine that? Run the gates! Heck no! But anyway, he put this guy on the front lines. This guy died. So he murdered him. David's a man after God's heart, remember. Okay, you're following me. Good. I think you're getting the thing. Then after this, God in his craziness, Bathsheba has Solomon, one of the greatest kings in the history of the world, not just Israel. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, God has some sort of, he's redempted and, and caring. It's just amazing. But what people forget, after this happened, incest happened in David's family. One of the brothers had sex with one of the sisters by raping her. Then one of the brothers knew this, Absalom, and then he killed his brother who did that. This is in David's house. This is his sons and daughters. This was going on. So Absalom kills the brother. And then Absalom has this streak of bitterness now because David wasn't taking care of things like this. Rebelled against his father. Came back and kicked David out of the kingdom and usurps his father and takes over the kingdom. David is so weird because in this whole interaction, he doesn't get mad. He goes away and he weeps because he realizes what's going on. I mean, there's a lot more to this, you understand. You can go deeper. But then he finally gets his kingdom back. Why? Because Absalom dies in battle. So another one of his sons dies. This is what's beginning to go down. So David returns. And now he's warring. But he's warring against, his factions of his people and outside of himself too. So his kingdom's starting to spiral down. David takes the census. When God says don't, he does. God gets mad at him. Keeps going downhill. Now David is a smart person. God says, who do you want me to judge you? Another nation? Or something else? Or me? And David says, God, judge us because you're merciful. They're not. So he realized he needed to be judged. You see? Now remember, this is what? A man after God's heart. There's a lot of hope in his story, folks. And there's a lot of reality in it too. Then another son tries to steal the kingdom from David when David's basically on his deathbed. Let's take advantage of him now. We can get it. Let's do it. And all the wives and their sons are kind of, conspiring to get this kingdom. And Bathsheba said, hey, Solomon's supposed to be the man. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it, except these. So put him into place now. And then, the last thing David does is he hands over the kingdom to his son and charges him to build the temple that was in David's heart for God. Now remember, one of the things David wanted to do, but he couldn't do, is he wanted to build a real temple because, he had a real God and he wanted to do it all up. Some of the, the churches that you go into and they wear suits and ties and they really dress up, and sometimes you wonder about that. Well, you have to understand there's some theologies and some people say we need to bring our best to God every week. And that means I need to come dressed the best, sing the hardest, play the best, preach the best. You understand? That was David's attitude, quite frankly. I want to build a temple that is so magnificent that the world will look on it and go, wow, your God is amazing. But he couldn't build it because he was a man of war. So his son, he charged his son with building the temple. And that was one of Solomon's greatest accomplishments. And then David dies.